perseverance, whether it's in your marriage, it's in your friendships, it's in your work, it's the highest character quality that you can be called to. Because if you don't persevere, you'll never know. And number two, you're likely, as part of the stopping, to, curse the heavens that
Yeah.
your luck was so bad.
Welcome to FundSeeder RISE. I'm your host, Emanuel Balarie. Today's guest is Scott Ford, CEO of Westrock Coffee and chairman of Westrock Asset Management. Under his leadership, Westrock Coffee has grown into a global business serving some of the world's largest retailers and brands while creating economic opportunities for the farming communities across the globe. Prior to Westrock, Scott served as CEO of Alltel, where he helped build one of America's largest wireless communication companies before its sale to Verizon Wireless. Throughout his career, he has been an entrepreneur, investor, and business builder, operating at the intersection of technology, consumer markets, agriculture, and capital allocation. From scaling multi-billion-dollar enterprises to investing with long-term family office mindset, Scott brings a unique perspective on leadership, risk-taking, and creating lasting value. Scott, thank you for being on this podcast with me.
My pleasure. Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Scott, this is, I've been really excited about this podcast, and mainly because you've really had like probably 5 or 6 careers into one. Investment banker, Fortune 500 CEO. You built obviously a quantitative investment shop. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of navigate in an hour all the learnings and the key learnings that you've had. But I thought it would be best to really start at the beginning. And for me, the beginning, and I've heard you mention this before, is your father and the fact that he grew up in the Great Depression and that it really created almost like a base and a worldview for you and how you lived life and how you created enterprise. So like, give me a little bit of a background of your upbringing in Arkansas with your father and what that looked like.
Sure. Well, yeah. So basically, every side of my family has been in Arkansas for 100 years, and there's, as my grandmother used to love to say, we're all Democrats, but there's us and there's them, and we always knew who us was, and it was very kind of tribal politics in the day, and the economic boom that took place in Arkansas was was ahead of us, and it was hand to mouth living through the 20s and 30s and really into the 40s here. My father's two brothers didn't survive childhood. Poverty is poverty is a tough teacher, and but my grandmother and my grandfather kept a godly, positive spirit and were wonderfully influential and affirming with me and my sister, and were hugely important people in our lives. But we always knew that they carried this hold that when you lose a child, you carry in even if covered completely by God's grace, right? You carry that forever, and that laid dormant in me as I went off and had a career in finance, went to New York, was luckily, as I told people, most of the time if you're randomly selected to get struck by lightning, it's really bad. But every now and then the same odds can hit you and it's really good. And Jack Stevens plucked me out of all of the people in the world and made me his assistant and put me in charge of running his trading operation. And the Stevens family are the key to understanding the renaissance of Arkansas. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But I worked for him for 10 years. Then I got to work for my father and then succeeded my father. And we had this great run and created a lot of value for people. We created 20 something billion dollars of value in 13 years riding the wireless wave. And I took a year off and had always been doing some charity work in Rwanda. And that's where the coffee business started when I I ran into the fact that there were women trying to keep their children alive just like my grandmother, except in Rwanda, they were having the price fixed and people were profiteering off of 'em, and something clicked in me at 47, and I declared war. I declared this, like, personal war on the coffee industry as it existed, and I thought it would take me a couple of years, and I would scratch that itch, and I'm 17 years into it now,
Yeah.
still scratching
So
it.
so it seems to me, and I do want to go back to the beginning. It's almost like two chapters or two volumes in your life, which is the first one, you're just working, you have a great mentor, with Stevens, and then the second one is there's something that inspired almost this conviction in you to right or wrong, or that maybe brought memories from maybe what you heard about your great grandfathers or parents. Is that accurate, or
Yeah,
what?
I think that's as simple a way to divide it as we're likely to come up with.
Okay, okay, good. Of course, there's it's we're not talking about black and white, right? This is the part of the journey. But I am curious. It's actually quite difficult, right, to come out of poverty, right? Like, I know my wife and I talk about this mindset, right, which is this poverty mindset, this lack mindset, right? That some people just it's just very difficult, right? And then you mentioned your grandparents had a positive, more like hope-filled, outlook or attitude, right? And when we've interviewed people, Scott, and on our podcast, we talk about some of the greatest traders in the world, right? Like, forget about how they size positions or, how they look at the markets, that the mindset is like premier in what makes you successful over long term and,
Yeah,
and over the short term.
yeah.
Uh, so growing up, when you were a kid and you saw your dad and you saw your grandparents, like how did that look like practically? Like, how did that get instilled in you in terms of having a hope-filled, positive mindset?
Well, they had had they had a change in life by the time I came along. I was born in 1962. Some of my earliest memories, 3, 4 years old, are with my grandparents at the new house they built, and it was a brick house. We'd moving up, out in the
How
country.
old how old were you again?
I was 4,
4, okay.
1966. I remember walking it. They had the studs in and the floor joists, but they hadn't yet put the floor in, and that was one of my earliest memories, and it was a big deal. I mean, it was a new house, and it was a nice house, and it was on 120 acres of land, and they had really changed from but it was also on the same land that my grandmother had grown up with her 6th grade education. They had gone back and bought it, and, anyway, they taught me about raising cows, and I still trade cattle to this day, 60 years later. I still love all that. But, he had gotten an education, so the community came together. He was a bright guy, my grandfather. His name was Arch Ford, and one guy loaned him a mule, and another guy, literally tacked up a shack lean-to on the back of his house so that he would have a place to stay, and he would take the mule on Sunday afternoon, and he would go 9 miles through the bottomlands and go to Conway, Arkansas, where he went to what is today University of Central Arkansas. It was Arkansas Normal. It was a teaching college at the time. And he got an education. So somebody helped him with fees. The community put the money together for his fees. One guy loaned him a mule. One guy loaned him a bedroom. And then he would ride back on Friday. He would work the weekends and go back. So by the time this transpired, literally in the late 20s, early 30s, he's in the CCC camps, as a carpenter and all of that through the Depression. But he comes out of that as a teacher. And then he becomes an administrator, and he became eventually became the commissioner of education for the state of Arkansas in 1957 as a young man. And his task was to integrate the public school system after Central High and he did that from 1957 till he retired it in 1983. And so he was appointed by 6 different governors, Republicans and Democrats. My dad was in the state senate. Then my dad had partnered with his father-in-law, and they built this little local telephone business, and they were starting to get that going. They had gone to Jack Stevens for financing, and he had financed them twice when they'd run out of money and they weren't going anywhere. And so in that environment, as a kid, I heard political talk, national politics, state politics, local politics, all politics are local. And then also, how do you build a business and how do you get it financed and who do you partner with and who's going to help you and who's just going to kind of sit outside and pot shot and who's worth investing in and who do you never trade an old friend for a new friend. Good to make new friends, but you never trade an old, all this kind of local rules for living that applied to politics and business and your community. That was the background noise of my entire life. And people said, "Well, you work with your family members." I said, "I've never. I've been the family member. I've been the junior family member. I've been the senior family. I've worked for other families, but I've never, except for when I worked for Merrill Lynch, I've never worked for a firm that didn't have a family train." And people say that's really weird. I go, "You're really weird. It's
Yeah.
always been that way until the
Yeah.
last 100 years. For thousands of years, it's been that way." So
That's
I grew up in that kind of environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, and you talked about it at the beginning with this, I think you used the word tribal, right? And, you know, and in many ways, you're right, historically and even successfully now, like where the people that or, the knowledge that's passed down from generations, right, is gold. Like, why start all over again, right? If you have that tight relationship and that tight ecosystem from that perspective. Okay, so then you mentioned your father, and this is obviously a big success story where Alltel Wireless was just a small regional, telephone operator that became a massive player. I don't, what was the amount that you ended up selling it to Verizon for? Like 27 billion? I don't.
Yeah, 29 billion was the final print after private equity bought it for 27.5, and they sold it a year and a half later to Verizon and AT&T for 29, and that way they were able to deliver to each competitor that could buy the assets without having to put it in a government trust, which would have destroyed a third of the business, which had been the MO that most companies were following. So anyway, that's how that worked out. And then I went on the AT&T board 2 or 3 years later, and I did that until just this last year. I retired.
Yeah. So your father built, all the cellular company, but you came on board, and I know early on, and obviously we have a relationship, we go way back, so I know, we know I know the story, but I think, the purpose again of this podcast, right, is you have aspiring traders, even business people, emerging managers, and it's passing along wisdom from mentors and those who have gone ahead that they don't have
Yeah,
access to it, right? And so,
right.
the themes are pretty, as I've interviewed these people, Scott, like it's amazing how the themes of successful people are just exactly the same. I mentioned mindset one, but I remember an interview that I had with Thomas Petterfy, the founder of Interactive Brokers, who came from Hungary with $100, right? And he built Timber Hill and then he built Interactive Brokers. And the thing he told me was, that stood out to me was like, if it's not outside the law of physics, it's possible. Like it has to be possible, right? Like,
Of
and,
course.
and it's that mindset. So you grew up, and your dad was, and then you went to college, and you decided not to do the family business, but you got plucked out by Warren Stevens, right? Or no,
It was actually Jack, and then I worked
Jack
for
Stevens.
Warren for 2 years and then went to work for Jack for the next 8.
Yeah. So what do you think, and yeah, you're obviously a CEO and you manage people. What did Jack see in you where he said, Scott is the person that I want to, not only mentor maybe, but just help me in terms of my business?
Yeah. Well, I have never been asked that question, actually. Let me back up and give you like 1 minute of context. So the Stevens brothers started on a farm with nothing, working behind a mule. The older brother, Whit, was 16 years older, and Whit was able to make enough money trading, even through the depression, to be able to then send his 16-year younger brother to high school. You had to go live at a boarding school. There were no high schools in the community where they're from in South Arkansas. So he then went to Columbia Military Academy, then he went to the Naval Academy, and he graduated class of 47 out in 46. They were trying to run him through in 3 years, obviously, for the war. The war ended, and a lot of those guys were sent back to. And Jack came back and partnered with Witt and on a handshake. And at that juncture, they were kind of municipal bond and local utility stock traders. That was where they got their start. And they came across an asset that they, and it's a great story, and it's too long to tell here, but Jack knew the price that a local natural gas field was for sale. And he had been asked to introduce a friend of his in Texas to an insurance company that he sold bonds and utility stocks to, if he would take him to New York and introduce him, because he was trying to get a loan at $3 a barrel of proven reserves of oil in the ground. Jack goes up there with him. The guy's not interested in that. But he said, do you have natural gas? He goes, no, this is a wet play. And he said, well, I would lend, and I don't know this number, I would lend X per MCF proven reserves in the ground for gas. Jack changes his flight, goes to Fort Smith, Arkansas, gets an option for the company because he knew that that was more than the company was for sale for. Gets an option on it, then comes to Little Rock, walks his brother through it, and they buy it. That turned out to be the Arkoma gas field, which everybody's heard of now because, like, Jerry Jones came up out of the Arkoma gas field. Boone Pickens made a lot of money in the Arkoma gas field. All that Oklahoma pre-shale play in western Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. Anyway, they become the largest individual owners of natural gas leases in the country. And then they do three things with that money. This is in the mid 1950s. They do three things with the money. Number one, they ran a big trading operation. They continued to run trading, and they were prop traders before prop trading had a name. Second thing they did, they bought businesses, operating businesses that they thought had great prospects for the next 30 years. And I asked them, because I said, this was before the coining of the private equity had not been coined as a phrase. LBOs was not a phrase. MBOs was not a phrase. I said, what did y'all call it when you bought these businesses? And he says, well, our best deals were where we borrowed more than we paid for the company. Now, you tell me what the title of that is. I don't even know. The third thing they did with their money was they went back and they invested in their community, and they backed my father and my grandfather, who were trying to build a little local wireline telephone business. They backed this guy named Sam in the retail business, who was in Newport, Arkansas most of his life, had moved up to Northwest Arkansas and was going to do 2 stores. Wasn't sure if he could, and they financed this guy named Sam Walton. They financed this guy named Don, who had been driving trucks to Chicago to deliver fresh chickens and Tyson Foods, and they financed Sheridan Garrison, that famous truck driver who became an operator that sold his business that became FedEx Ground.
Mm.
They financed JB Hunt, the largest trucking company in the United States today. So they financed Walter Smiley at Systematics. They financed and poured a portion of the wealth they had back into the community of people of whom and from whom they came. And that is where the money that underwrote all the Fortune 1000 companies that are in Arkansas today, which are disproportionately way out of norm for our population and the overall wealth of the state, that's where it came from. Now, fast forward. Maybe when I met him, I actually got invited on a quail hunt, and I met him on a quail hunt, and we had been in the same group one morning, and he wanted to talk through lunch, and then we stayed, and he said, y'all go hunt. Scott and I are going to talk. We talked all afternoon. He kept me around. We talked all evening. We started again the next morning. 6 weeks later, I went to work for him. Now, what did he see in me? I had some new computer skills that were brand new. My first day at Merrill Lynch, they rolled in a personal computer, and I didn't know how to turn it on. It took me, Lotus 123 had just come out. You still had to run things to word processing, but Multimate started to come out. And I had some of these rudimentary skills on a personal computer that were kind of revolutionary. And then the other thing I think I had, which was, everybody has the aptitude. Aptitude just takes time. It's context and time. And you don't have to have 180 IQ, or it's just context which has to be taught to you, and time, reps. But the only way people are going to let you hang around and develop aptitude is if you have a great attitude. And I had a great attitude. So people would say, go get me this. And I'd say, okay, fine. And people would expect 3 days. I'd stay up all night. I worked 7 days a week. I slept 6 nights a week. I worked all night one night. I kind of balanced out how to take a nap under my desk. And if it was important enough for them to ask me to do it, it was important enough that they got it immediately and that they got it with, is this what you wanted? Can I do more? What
Yeah.
should I do different? And I think that attitude allowed me to stay around people that were the smartest people in the world at the time, right? My first boss was a guy named Jack Levy at Merrill Lynch. He'd just become a vice president. He went on to run Goldman Sachs M&A for decades. I got really fortunate in the mentors I had. Jack Stevens. I mean, there is no better mentor. And then I got to work with my dad. So what did Jack Stevens see? I think he saw a guy that didn't know anything, but that was willing to work. That's really all he saw.
Yeah.
And I was of the tribe of reinvesting in people in Arkansas.
Yeah, that's a spectacular story, Scott. I mean, obviously, there has to be a movie one day,
Ah,
right? I mean, in terms of just really Jack's impact and what he
it's the
what
only book. People say all the time, "Why don't you write a book?" And I go, "They're not my stories. They're not
yeah.
mine to write." But
But
that's a story
it's
that's worth
amazing,
telling.
go ahead.
No, I'm just saying you're right. That's a story that's worth telling.
It's amazing, and again, just it's these thematic overarching of these podcasts. So I spoke with David Saunders, who was the head trader for Julian Robertson and Tiger Cubs, right? And he described Julian as one who would just be able to just get all this information and just quickly make decisions, and then ultimately the people who were around him, he backed them, and they were successful, and they win, and it's a very similar playbook, if you will, but quite frankly, I think even more spectacular, especially, the companies that are around today, Tyson, Walmart, and reinvestment. And I would imagine that he also reinvested, of course, not just in capital, but in terms of mentorship,
The
which
greatest teacher, the great, completely taught through he didn't talk a lot,
yeah.
and he completely taught through the Socratic method. He would ask me a question, I would give him an answer, and then I would just get another question that made me doubt the answer, and then I'd get another question that made me doubt the answer to the answer, and a little bit I eventually learned to say, "I don't know, but I will go
Yeah.
work on that, and I will come back with some ideas."
Yeah.
And you only have it's like anything else. You're just trying to stack probabilities on your side. So if you say, "Oh, I know the answer to that," you've picked out one square on what's likely to be 1,000 squares. Are you sure you want to just make that one bet?
Yeah.
Really? I'm
Yeah.
giving you all the time in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing you mentioned about what he saw, and obviously we talked about the mindset, but the really the hard work, like the countless hours, like, I think Jack and his new Market Wizard, Jack Schwiger, who in his new Market Wizards book, said like the theme in this book of these solo traders is this idea that they just like are hard workers. I mean, they're just like, I mean, and if you want to really be a successful trader, you have to outwork every single person. You have to be passionate from that. And again, the similarities with like elite athletes, and to that point, like I'd love for you to tell that story. I know we're going all over, but I know I asked you once about or you mentioned the story about the champion bull rider, and when you asked them, like, what's the secret to your success?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was Ricky Hyde. He was an NFR, which is the top 15 in the rodeo world. He was a calf roper, a great calf roper, and he was hands down the best calf roper that ever came out of Arkansas. And he was a top 10 or 15 roper for years and years. And one weekend, when my kids were little, my wife was doing something with her girlfriends and the kids, and I didn't have to be anywhere on Alltel business, and it was like a 3-day weekend, and I went, well, that's really weird. I never have 3 days to myself ever. Things at work are good. The wife and the kids are good. I'm caught up with everything. And I was talking to Ricky, and he was trying to figure out he had to go to Iowa. He had to go to Iowa And then he had to run back to, Nebraska, and he had to run back to Kansas and go back to Iowa. And I said, "How you gonna do all that?" He said, "Well, the other guy that he normally went with, his horse was hurt. He wasn't going." I said, "Well, I'll come drive with you." So for 3 days, I basically night and day, I become, you just live in the truck. He gets out and he ropes, feeds the horse, he gets back in. Whoever's last slept is up, and whoever last drove gets to, and for 3 days. And I was talking to him, I said, I've noticed in my own line of work, and you see it in golf and these other things, there's a top 100. And then inside the top 100, there's a top 20. And the top 20, they, for the most part, know who they are. And the other 80, for the most part, know who they are too. And inside the top 20, there's a top three. And every now and then, on a really rare moment, there's a top one. And we talked about Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods, in their eras, and all, Byron Nelson winning 11 times in a row. And we were talking about these kind of, but what separates everybody's good? Everybody's got a good horse. They were all the stud athlete on their football team. What's the difference in the mindset, or or you tell me, what's the difference in the top 3 and the top 15? And he goes, "Well, everybody in the top 20," and he goes through, they can do this, they can do this, they can do this, and he deconstructs the entire process, from training a horse to riding to scoring to getting out to, coming down, working the rope, blanking, tying, all that. He said they can all do that. He goes, "The difference is the top guys love to drive the truck." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "These guys that are in the top 50, and they hate driving the truck, they hate being away from home, they hate just burning down the freeway, they hate just sitting there, they can't stand it, and they fight it." And he said, "Everybody loves the rope. Everybody loves it when the lights are on, the music's loud, and everybody's cheering." He goes, "Everybody loves that. You gotta love to drive the truck. That's the
Yeah.
difference." And I thought, "Man, I don't think I've ever heard such wisdom in a
Yeah.
pithy sentence."
Yeah, that was good, and sort of the relatable thing for our listeners could be, if someone is like a technical chartist, right? And they just love looking at the charts, right? Or the mundane. They love the process, and not just like the ups and down. And it's true. My daughter is, she's 12, and she's on the pathway. She has dreams of being a college soccer player, and she loves practice. I mean, she loves practice. She enjoys that, and that to me is encouraging as something for the future. Okay, so much content here, so much good content, Scott. But I'm gonna just jump back to, you decided to then join your father, and then you became CEO of Alltel. And you know, what were some key learnings during that time? And by learnings, really more of the things that, like, you thought you knew, right? You were working for Jack Stevens. You grew up on, hearing all this, how politics works, and you felt confident in terms of your ability. But then you joined your father, and now you're building this world class company, like, and you had some hardships, right? And the things that refined your character. Like, can you think back, like, on one or two things that, made you pivot a little bit in terms, or grow, or take it to the next level?
Sure, so many. But, so I was 33 years old, January of 1996. They just passed the telecom regulation changes in '96, and they had decided to not regulate wireless and to let it be a competitive business. And the guy that was my dad's right-hand man had had a major heart attack and never really fully went back to work. Uh, they didn't have anybody else that they felt, was ready to run the whole business. Joe had about 5 years left. He was about 60 at the time, and somehow or another, I think Jack convinced him to put me in as his number 2, put me on the board and all of that. As you can imagine, 33 Jack was a large shareholder, but it was a publicly held institution with about $4 or $5 billion market cap, so it was a decent sized business. But the stock had been stuck at about 25 for about 5 or 6 years, and, at this juncture, I didn't know it at the time, at this juncture also, because of the wireless boom, we were investing, so they were investing in the beginning network build out in Arkansas and North Carolina and Albany, Georgia, 3 towns, Little Rock, Charlotte, Albany, Georgia. And they had started borrowing their dividend. That's a hard place to be when you're a business. So essentially, as I told Mr. Stevens, as I was leaving his office, I said, Mr. Stevens, I grew up in his house and I, I know what I know here. I said, but I know nothing about telecommunications, nothing. And I just want to make sure he was clear, I guess. And he was, I was told this story. He's a Marlboro Red smoker. And I never will forget. He was smoking that cigarette and drifting up, and he goes, "The nouns are different, but the verbs are all the same. You'll
Mm,
do well."
mm,
And with that, and I thought about it, and I went, "Okay, that is a testament to, at the end of the day, do your work, know your facts, learn the nouns, and trust your gut."
yeah.
You know. So I arrived, and I had, and I wish I'd written them down. I had 3 things that I had thought about. Number 1, I wanted my father's career to end well. And so what were my qualifications? Jack Stevens and Joe Ford trusted me. And enough board members trusted Jack Stevens and Joe Ford that they were willing to trust them trusting me. That's number 1. And number 2, they knew I'd listen to them, right? So they weren't taking a dangerous crap shot with a guy who's just going to go up with a new theory of building a wireless business. No one had ever built a wireless business. No one. I mean, we were all like, we think this might be worth something. We better have somebody run it that we can talk to. That was essentially, I think, the criteria. So people said, well, why didn't they hire a wireless company CEO? Go, there weren't any. There was no one
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
hire. You had to create one. So anyway, I wanted my father's career to end well. I wanted him to get the glory and the honor of whatever good came. And I wanted the shareholders who had stayed with us. I didn't care about the ones that came and went and were trying to make a spread. That's a different business. There's no moral commitment to them other than the rule of law, right? You owe them, and the law says you owe them the same thing as an old shareholder, but that's not what real life says,
Yeah.
right? So you have to obey the law. You take care of them both. But at the end of the day, they're going to come and go. The guys that have been with you and are waiting on you, you owe them.
Yeah.
You owe them a successful outcome. The hell with the rest of them.
Yeah.
That's just life.
Yeah.
So that was the mindset, and it didn't take me long to figure out we need to set an aspirational goal. And I said, guys, we need to come up with a plan and work backwards from getting to $100 a share. This crap about hanging out here at $25 a share and that's okay, and paying it all out in a dividend and borrowing our dividend. This is not okay. Let's just do the work and figure out mathematically what has to be true operationally, and then let's go have the guts to do operationally and from an allocation perspective, capital allocation perspective, that which will drive our stock to 100 over the next 5 to 8 years. Let's set a goal, shall we? 3 of the top 5 people in the company quit within the next 3 weeks, right? Because
Wow.
that was audacious. That was dangerous. That was dangerous.
It
And
was
I
not
thought that
comfortable.
it was very uncomfortable, and, it just really wasn't what they signed up for. I was too different. I was the boss's kid, didn't know anything, running a public company, and, of course, the wah wahs are all full of wah wah wah. And, you know, who cares? Of course they're gonna say that. If I were them, I would say that. You can't be offended by all the horrible things they're gonna say about nepo baby and all that. Here's what they do. Here's what they do. They say what they want, and then they eat what you serve them over a 10 to 15-year time frame. Focus
Yeah.
on that,
Yeah.
and, you serve it to them on a gold platter,
Yeah.
and, it took us 13 years, and we got to $100, and we sold it.
Amazing.
That's it.
Ama-
Everything else
Amazing.
was a detail that we had to operate our way through to build the business.
Yeah, amazing. But the ideas of one trust, right? So there was that trust both ways where they trusted you and they knew you would listen and you were humble enough to listen. And then having like a new narrative or a goal or like, hey, this is where we're heading. We need to get this price to 100. And another thing that I think was interesting that you mentioned about the nouns and the verbs, which is really applicable, right? People talk about AI and how is it going to replace things, or nothing's new under the sun, right? It's almost like problem solution, problem solution, right? And that's what they knew you could deliver. It didn't really matter what industry you were going into.
Yeah. And the basic principles of whether you're managing money or whether you're trading, whether you're running a business, building a business, working back and forth, you know, I had a great I had a great I have a great, great friend in life, and we worked together at Merrill Lynch. His name's Jeff Fox. And Jeff and I worked in the M&A department at Merrill Lynch together. We worked at the Stevens family office for 10 years together. He went out to Alltel at the same time I did. He was the number 2 guy at Alltel. And he asked me one time when it was hard. We were in a long, hard slog, and we weren't making much progress. And I literally had people like I had one shareholder I went to meeting. He threw the proxy at me and all this, and you just deal with people. They are what they are, and you don't let them inform you about what you are doing. You just acknowledge that's how you feel. Okay, thank you, and move on. That guy ended up making a fortune with us because he did in the end stay. But Jeff asked me, he said, people love to be on a team that's winning. They need to know that they're winning, and they can't know if they're winning if they don't know what the goal is. So what are we going to be number one at? And I said, what are we going to be number one at? We're the 24th largest wireless business. We're the 14th largest wireline business. We're the 6th largest data processing business. What are we going to be number one at? And I said, well, you tell me what we're going to be number one at. And he goes, that's not for me to answer. He goes, I'm with you. I came here with you. You answer that. I'll keep them busy till you come up with a good plan of what we're going to be number one at, and then I'll deliver against it. It's just the greatest friend, greatest, wingman you could ever, no matter how cloudy, bumpy, choppy, I'd lose sight of him for months. I'd finally regain. He's right there. He's right where he should always be.
Yeah,
He's the terrific. He went on, was a very successful CEO and ran several businesses and made a lot of money and did really well. But at this juncture in life, he had a role to play. And his role was, I'm going to be the greatest number 2. And you're going to tell us what we're going to be number 1 at. I thought and I thought and I thought and I thought, and I couldn't come up with anything. And eventually I came up with this. Well, we can't be number 1 on an aggregate basis of anything. We're too small, but we can be on a relative basis. So we're going to be the number 1 shareholder return business in our industry. That's what we're going to do, because that's a relative basis, and we can exercise our where we have choices, we can exercise those choices to derive that outcome. Long story short, that's exactly what we did. And I said, but to do that, we're going to have to tell the management team that we might sell this business if we don't scale up. So we tried buying Sprint. We tried doing a bunch of things to scale up that didn't work out. And at the end, we ended up selling. But what we did was we brought in executive coaches for the top 3,000 people. And we said, if we don't make it, this is going to give us the best chance to make it. And if we don't make it, you're going to be equipped for your next journey in your career. And we are going to be the number 1 deliverer. We're going to be the number 1 steward. We're going to deliver more with what we've been entrusted with than anybody else in the story. And there's all sorts of theology behind all that. And people got it, and they signed on. The whole, all 25,000 people in the company, they signed on to answer the bell. We're going to be the number 1 shareholder return promo. And we were. They delivered 19% compounded over those 13 years, the second highest compound return in all of tech and telecom. All of it was 6.5%, including dividends, and that was Southwestern Bell that became AT&T. So we almost tripled the field because we declared it as what we were there to do.
amazing, amazing. So you were successful. We'll have to fast forward now to the Westrock journey and talk about obviously Westrock Asset Management. But you had no clue when you started in the telecom sector, and you did it twice, Scott. You did with the coffee business. After you sold Alltel, like at what point did you start Westrock Asset Management? Let's start first. Was that before or after Westrock Coffee? And
It's
tell us
really,
what that
really,
is.
really just after, because when we started the coffee business, look, there were just 2 or 3 of us, and I didn't want to be unhedged. We were making I had to finance it all out of my own pocket. Nobody would lend us money. I wasn't going to take money from people if we weren't free cash flow positive. I wasn't going to ask people to fund charity on my behalf. If this turned out to be charity because it didn't work, then I would write it off. But I wasn't going to ask other people to do that. the month I got free cash flow positive, Whit Stevens and Jim Sowell both invested in Westrock to allow me to pay my bank lines down to reorder inventory for Walmart, which we had gotten an order from, thank God. But speak of those that have been with you for a long, 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 long time. This is Whit Jr. that did that. So we started the coffee business. Literally, we sold Alltel in January, and I was back in Rwanda working. And in April of '09, I ran across the fact that coffee has to be milled, but for it to be milled, you in Rwanda, you had to sell it to one of two millers, and then they would then figure out its quality, its value, separate it out, and sell it on to the world market. And unfortunately, these two guys were setting the same price every day, and it was about half what that coffee crop was worth in the region. So I literally called my wife and I said, "Hey, I'd like to start a coffee company. I know that," I said, I'm taking a year off. I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm going to spend this year. She knew that already. I'd looked at running for governor, U.S. Senate. I had the polls and the money. The polls, I just didn't want it. I didn't want to do that. I am a commercial animal more than a political animal. And while I looked at this and I said, we can build a mill and offer them a competitive fair price, which is going to be close to twice what they're making today. And we can still make a 15%, and I'm going to have to finance it, but it's a good thing to do with the money we made in Alltel, and I'll do this for a year. 17 years later, we're the largest specialty trader in the world for the top 5 or 10% of the beans. We have offices in 10 countries. We source out of 35. We've got 100 people outside of London that run that business, and we're the largest private label manufacturer. We do Walmart, McDonald's, Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, et cetera, et cetera, here in the United States, as well as cans and bottles that you buy in a C-store or on your retail shelf for other major brands, CPG brands. And the business turned out to be a successful business. But I didn't know anything about it other than you can't profiteer off some of the poorest people in the world that are trying to keep their children alive, or God will raise up a crazy man like me who will declare war on you. And
Yeah.
suppose that's how that happened.
Yeah. You know, the playbook for Westrock, the playbook for Alltel, the playbook that Jack Stevens and what you grew up, I mean, was it still a very much a similar playbook where there's like a high conviction of something and then you don't really know and you don't have all the answers, right? Like you're like,
Sure.
but you just feel like, hey, this is where we're heading, and that's like, was it the same? Like in terms of how?
Yeah. At one level, at one very I'd say there's 3 levels. There's what would anybody say looking at the facts we were looking at? They would have all said, "Don't do it." Okay, got it. That really doesn't bother me. They all said, "Don't go follow your father." They all said, "Don't go to New York." I mean, they all said that. They all say everything. They're all wrong about your life. So, yeah, just be respectful. For those that have deeply earned the right to be heard, hear them and set everything else aside. Set the noise aside. So that's one level. Second level, I had high confidence I could learn the nouns and that I could figure it out. And so I ran the trading desk, and it was from running the trading desk that the money management business came out, and and then meeting Brady Preston, and then my oldest son, who couldn't watch me struggle anymore, left a hedge fund and came and said, "I'm coming to work for you, and I'm going to help you because I can't watch you struggle while you're trying to help people. The cost of it is so high. I'm coming to help." And then the third one came, and then the second son came. So today they're all here. They came one at a time in their own season in life and said, "I'm in." I'm thankful for that. But I knew we could figure that part of it out. And then there was this third thing, and it was this very, very deep thing, which just was, people talk about, I wish I hadn't seen it, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. You know, I, I just couldn't turn my back. I couldn't walk away. There were no government functions. There was no antitrust division in Rwanda. There's no way that they were going to figure out what was happening there. But, I'd been living in that world, testifying before the FCC and the Justice Department on 100 acquisitions in the newspaper and wireless business over the previous 20 years. I knew what I was looking at. And I just said, this just can't stand. The private sector has to act here. And, you know, okay, so that's fallen to my lot. Fine. And then I was confident that it would be awful and it would cost me everything. I knew from day one it was going to cost me everything. And it did.
Mm.
And the day that I told my wife, "Hey, I think we're going to go broke. I can't let it go though." She said, "Well, we started broke. We had $600 the day we got married. If we have to do it again, we have to do it again. I'm with you. I'm with you."
Amazing.
And
How'd that feel to hear
you
that from your
know,
wife?
that was probably the greatest individual conversation with any human I've ever had.
Wow.
From that moment forward, I was no longer afraid. And it turned out I was dangerous when I wasn't afraid. Live or die, you're not living, right? I
Yeah.
may live, I may die, but here's what I know. That model, way you're doing it, the way you're exploiting people, that's dying. And I may die
Yeah.
too. Good, we'll both be dead.
Yeah.
It was almost kind of that mindset, and she totally got it. And she said, "Look, this is what God has put on your heart. Who am I to tell you you're not going to do it? I'm in."
Wow.
Well, fortunately, shortly after that, it turned, and today I look like an economic genius, but it was not that way for a long, long, long.
Yeah. And that's the idea of conviction, right? And having something that you believe that's even above and transcends yourself, right? And you saw poverty and injustice in Rwanda, and I know you had, President Kagame asked you for help, like, and if somebody's asking for help and you're seeing it, and you have your own history of growing up in a family that experienced that, and people have helped you, you couldn't turn your back to that. I mean, that's who you are. I mean, whether people understand it or not, it's like who Scott Ford is. Is that kind of an accurate, representation?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I even understood all of that 17 years ago when I ran into it, but I would say
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
it turns out that's a really good distillation.
Yeah. So on the trading side, I didn't know that you started trading yourself from a coffee perspective, and you would imagine once you sold Alltel and you had some liquidity, and that you would farm it out to some wealth advisors or hedge funds, and
Yeah.
but you didn't do that. You decided to build your own quantitative investment company, and tell me, like, why? Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
understand you saw a little bit, but, like, why did you decide to, like, undertake on that path, which was, quite frankly, opposite of what most people would do in your situation?
Yeah. Well, that's a recurring theme, isn't it? So when we had our liquidity event at Alltel, and I'd taken some of it and I said, "I'm gonna do the coffee business." And years later, I put more in, and we kept going. I kept building on that front, which created the conversation that, I told you about with my wife a minute ago. But earlier, I said, "Okay, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna start the coffee business. And in this, I would like to have managed in a liquid form." But here's what I don't want. I don't want the stock and bond market. I want alpha to the stock and bond market. And I want liquidity because I'm an operator. And when I see a business or want to make an investment as an operator, I've got all the stock and bond market exposure I need in my own company that I own. So I don't need any more in the market. Well, I'm illiquid here by nature. So I don't want any illiquidity. And I thought this has got to be and I don't want to earn nothing. I want to earn an equity like return. I want it to be liquid. I want to be able to take my money out anytime I want it. And I don't want I'm glad to pay you a fair fee, but I'm not looking to be I'm getting abused in Rwanda. I don't need that in the US from the fund managers. I couldn't find anything. They all had gates, they had lockups, they spent the average institution spends 60% of its gross on expenses. It's crazy. So we spend 6, 1/10. So we just finally at the end of the day said private equity is not an alternative to the stock and bond market. It's just levered equities that's illiquid. It's ridiculous. Everybody said, "Well, this is good diversification." I said, "Do you even know what the words mean that are coming out of your mouth?" It's Of course it doesn't mean that. So we decided at the end of the day, we were too little to get into the big multi-strat funds. We didn't know enough people. That's not the world we're from. We didn't know how to get into that. The ones that we did get exposed to had lockups, multi-year lockups, windows with redemption gates, blah 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 blah, and they weren't really alpha. They were mostly beta. They were mostly riding the equity or bond market, uh, and uh, and they were illiquid. So we said, okay, let's build our own. Great idea, huh? It won't take us but a couple of years. Shouldn't take us but a couple of years. So for 7 years, we looked like the biggest morons in the world. With 10 people, we said, we're going to build a multi-strat fund that generates ridiculously high gross returns with ridiculously low drawdown, with almost complete alpha and no beta, and it's going to be liquid. You can have all of your money back any month because the positions are going to be so small and so diversified and so not in any of these locked up funds. And for 7 years, we looked like idiots. In the eighth year, it looked like, well, that's interesting. In the ninth year, it looked pretty good. And in the 10th year, we were one of the top 10 funds in the world. And now all the other families that had run into the same experience we've got now 10 people just onboarding them because it's a great product. We earn higher CAGR than the average fund. We have much less drawdown. We have monthly liquidity. We charge 1/10 the fees and expenses, and we made it available to other people that were similarly frustrated with what was available on the market. And so that's turned out to be a really great idea in the 12th year.
That's the same thing, Scott. You're very you're very much consistent, and the playbook again, it seems to work for you and who you are, right? Like you
Yeah.
can, there's
We're willing
and
to suffer more than most
yeah.
people. We're willing to suffer more. I don't need affirmation. I'm not on social media. I don't care. We're willing to suffer. We're more desperate than most people we meet, but we're also bound by, is it the right thing by people? Really? Is it
What do you
really
mean
the
by
right thing
what
by
do you mean by sorry, Scott? What do you mean by being more desperate than most people you meet?
all I've ever done since I was literally in school is I read history, and I read economic history, military history. You're going to get political history and religious history through all that. And the thing I observed was the people that have really built something, they all have these two things in common. If you just look at them in their long suffering, you're not sure they're doing anything. Like he's still trying to build that coffee business 12 years later. He's still trying to build a multi-strat fund with 10 people where systems run all the trades and not people. From trade idea to implementation to execution to rebalancing nightly. They're still trying to do that 7 or 8 and 9 years later. What a fool's errand. It's what it looks like. But there's a desperateness underneath to see it through and to see it be successful that they all these guys have. They all have. And a lot of guys will burn bright for a while and then they fade. And they're brilliant for a while. And then they just lose interest. They lose energy, they lose interest, they take up some other interest. They want to go cure cancer. I don't know. We want to do these two things. We want to build the world's greatest coffee supply chain management for other people's brands. The bigger the book of business we get, the bigger we can take back to origin and be a cop, and the bigger the book we can trade around while we carry futures for Walmart and McDonald's and. It's a great trading opportunity for us to be able to carry their forward book and their futures. Uh, and then same thing with this quant fund. We partnered with Brady Preston. He had lots of opportunities to go do lots of other things, and he didn't want to be an employee. He wanted to be a partner, and he wanted to partner with people where he didn't have to build the business because he knew that wasn't his gig. He could build the systems, and we would build the business apparatus around it. And we've been great partners for 11 years now, I think. And
Yeah.
it's been great fun. So that's what I mean. He's got the same thing. It looks like he's just programming away over there, but there is a desperateness to be successful at
To
what he's
win.
doing.
Yeah.
That's just really, if you get too close to it, it scares people, frankly,
Yeah.
and they've all got it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a couple of just final questions and just I think what we've met obviously with FundSeeder, like many traders that have a dream and have an aspiration of, managing capital and competing and, many of them don't have the network, they don't have the tribe or the relationships, but, the ones that, maybe have the mindset, are desperate, are hungry, right? Like, are doing things where their parents are like, "What are you doing?" But they have that high conviction, right? What are some just one or two, like, encouraging words for them, like, to persevere and to keep going during maybe their darkest hour, or where they don't see the end of the journey, like, like, what has kept you going? I mean, I know that's kind of a long-winded question.
Yeah. Well, in the coffee business, which was by far the darker valley to traverse, I have, you know, I'll give you a real answer. I'll give you a real answer. 2025 was probably the hardest year we ever had. It was our third year into a 3-year build of this big ready to drink facility. I had customers wobbling. I had lots of issues. I had banks chirping, lots of issues. And in the middle of all that, we lost a very young grandchild. And that was in October of 25 and November. And I stayed home on Christmas Eve from work, which I rarely do, but I stayed home on Christmas Eve. We were getting together as a family that evening. And I got 3 phone calls from 3 of my best friends. Jeff Fox, the guy that I was talking to you about earlier, and 2 other guys. Back, and I hung up to back, and I hung up to back. 1, 2, 3. All 3 of them said the same thing. I love you. I'm with you. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your year. I'm sorry for the shit the banks are putting you through. Sorry for the issues with your customers. I believe in you. I'm with you. I love you. I'm thinking about you. I just wanted you to know that on Christmas Eve. I got that call. I hung up from one. I got another one, almost scripted. And one of them said, "How do you stay positive?" And I said, "I know that it's turning. I know that we win in the end. I know that it will manifest itself in a way that is good, not only for the people that we've helped, but for the people that have backed me. I owe I owe the people that we feed a moral obligation to get them the best price, and I owe the people that have invested with me a moral obligation for a great return. And all these other things are just things I have to manage between here and there. I've never wavered." And I said, and I'll tell you this. In the book of Job, all of Job's friends quit him. All of mine have stayed with me. All of them have hung in. And I've never crossed over and cursed God that it cost me everything. I've said, so be it. And that is the difference between mental health,
Yeah,
going through losing everything, and despair.
yeah,
And, God never left me. I never quit him. My friends didn't quit me. And guess what? Literally 30 days later, the whole thing turned around. The stock has since doubled, blah, 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 blah. It just wasn't quite time on Christmas Eve, but it showed itself over the next 30 or 60 days.
amazing.
So when it's darkest, it is darkest before the dawn. That's true. Perseverance is the only character quality is the highest. Perseverance, whether it's in your marriage, it's in your friendships, it's in your work, it's the highest character quality that you can be called to. Because if you don't persevere, you'll never know, and number two, you're likely, as part of the stopping, to curse the heavens that
Yeah,
your luck was so bad.
yeah,
So you got to stay really small in your trading, tiny. We all love the big money of a big fast trade, right? You have to stay tiny. You're making probability choices. You've got to have them broadly arrayed. You've got to have a system that keeps you from being your own worst enemy when you get excited or get depressed.
yeah,
And that needs to be written, and it needs to be owned by your friends as well as you. And if that's too much, you may be in the wrong profession, because
yeah.
you can't be that transparent where I'm willing to show these are my winners, these are my losers. And Emmanuel, I invite you to speak into any one of them that you'd like. That's where health is. That's
Yeah.
where perseverance comes from.
Well,
That's
that's
my
great.
own 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. Great counsel, Scott. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate your friendship, and I know your mentorship to me personally over the years. Like there's some people who just talk the talk, but you for sure you have walked it. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to
Thank you
come
for
on.
having
And
me on.
yeah,
Thanks
I've
for having me
enjoyed
on.
it.
Good luck to you in this endeavor. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Scott. Really, really appreciate it.
See you soon.
Thank you for joining us on the FundSeeder RISE podcast, where we spotlight exceptional independent traders from around the world and explore the future of active money management. To learn more about FundSeeder, our mission, and how we support emerging managers globally, please visit us at fundseeder.com. The information shared in this episode is provided for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or an offer or solicitation to invest in any fund or trading program. Trading futures and other derivatives involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Until next time, stay curious, stay disciplined, and keep rising.